off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
Added to the Air Force inventory in 1954, the F-100 North American Super Sabre was the first of the supersonic Century series of fighters introduced in the 1950s and 60s. It was the first U.S. Air Force aircraft to exceed Mach 1 in level flight. It was also the first aircraft employed by the Wild Weasels, whose crews used radar-seeking missiles to destroy enemy radar and surface-to-air missile installations. The two-seat F-100F also gained fame flying high-risk missions north of Vietnam's DMZ as a fast-forward air controller. The operation was known as Commando Sabre, and the F-100s used the call sign Misty. Charles Boyd graduated from Air Force pilot training in 1959. And he soon found himself in the cockpit of the hottest fighter jet of the day, the F-100. On April 22, 1966, during his 105th combat mission, Boyd's F-105 was hit by anti-aircraft fire and he was forced to eject. He would spend the next 2,488 days as a prisoner of North Vietnam. Returning home in February 1973 as one of the POWs repatriated during Operation Homecoming, he chose to remain in the military. He had a 36-year-long career in the Air Force, retiring as the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of U.S. European Command in Germany. He is the only POW to attain the rank of a 4-star general. Dick Rutan grew up in an aviation-oriented family, and he spent his youth building model airplanes with his younger brother, Bert. Rutan's military career began at age 19 as an Air Force aviation cadet. He advanced into fighter aircraft, serving in Vietnam. In 1967, he volunteered to become one of the founding Misties of Operation Commando Sabre. It was high-risk flying. In the 3 years the Misties flew, 28% of them were shot down. Dick Rutan flew 325 combat missions over Vietnam, ejecting twice from Air Force aircraft during his career. He retired having been awarded the Silver Star, 5 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 16 Air Medals, and a Purple Heart. His time as a civilian has been equally celebrated. He received the Presidential Citizens Medal from President Reagan, and the 1987 Collier Trophy for piloting the now famous Voyager experimental airplane on the only non-stop, non-refueled, around-the-world flight in history. Dean Cutter Cutshall of Fort Wayne, Indiana, acquired his North American Century Series fighter in 1996. Originally a U.S. Air Force aircraft, it served with the Turkish Air Force until the late 1980s when it was brought back to the U.S. Now immaculately restored in the markings of 6-time ace Francis Gabby Gabreski, the F-100F always wows during its rare airshow appearances. Warbirds in Review presents Dean Cutshall's F-100 and the American heroes General Charles Boyd and Lieutenant Colonel Dick Rutan.
So you are terrific. Thank you very much. As John said, I'm Connie Boland, the founder of Warbirds in Review. Along with my husband Ed, we had an idea 14 years ago that who would have ever believed that it would come this far. And sorry I'm a little out of breath and running in here, but I've had 2 Mustang flights. I've been out flying a P-51 with Jim Hagedorn. And as I bring up that name, Scott's Miracle Grow Company is our very generous presenting sponsor. So to Jim, thank you, and not only for this, but for the opportunity that I have to fly the P-51, thanks to he and Jack Roush. Somebody's got to do it, you know. And thanks to all of you for being here and making Warbirds in Review the success that it is. John Tennyson, Scott Guyette, and the whole crew at Sleeping Dog. They have been phenomenal this week. We have this morning did sunrise sorties out of the B-25 that Larry Kelly is flying for us. So look for that footage to come along, and you can see what we do when we go up and fly around and flail around and try to be in formation and look good for the cameras. But that's stuff. Look for that on Flying on Demand TV. It's going to be some good stuff. And just know that we weren't having any fun trying to do that. The Fagan World War II Fighter Museum in Granite Falls, Minnesota is the sponsor of our Veterans Coins, which you'll hear more about a little bit later. And to Jelly Belly, if you haven't visited the Warbird membership tent over here, we have a lot of Jelly Belly over there to give you a sugar attack later on. So I think it's just pretty cool to have an F-100 sitting here on our ramp, wouldn't you think? So I've known Dean Cutshaw for many, many years. He used to have a P-51 and somehow moved up to the F-100. I suspect that he'll tell us about that. And to Dick Rutan, we appreciate him being here, General Chuck Boyd. It's really pretty clever. I put together this F-100 deal, and I get a call from General Boyd, and he says, you think I could be part of that? And we said, yeah, I think you could be part of that. It'd be really nice. And to our good friend, David Hartman, who is our moderator, and thank you all for being here.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm David Hartman. What a privilege to be with you all here today, and for all of us to share in honoring our veterans, our active duty military, and the civilians who are so committed to maintaining the great history and the experiences of these patriots who have defended our freedom and continue to do that today. Please welcome Dean Cutshaw. Owns this beautiful airplane. Dean, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell us about your airplane. How did you come by it?
Well, in 1992, John Dilley and I and my crew chief, Paul Swick, went to Tracor, which is in the Mojave Desert. It used to be called Flight Systems, and the airplane had been flown back from Turkey about 3 years before that. It was in terrible shape. I made a bid on it and didn't get the bid, unfortunately. About 4 years later, in '96, a gentleman in Texas, Dallas, Texas, called me and said, hey, are you interested in the F-100 still? And I said, sure, we'd look at it. John and I and Paul went back to Dallas, Texas, and looked at the bird again and made the same offer we made to Flight Systems, and it was declined. About 6 months later, we get another phone call. It's a little more emergency now, and he says, hey, are you still interested? And I said, well, maybe so. He said, well, come on down and let's look at it again. So we did. We looked at it, and there was a beautiful T-33 sitting next to it, pristine. And I looked at it and found out that the gentleman also owned the T-33. Looked at John and Paul, and I said, this might be a good deal. So I offered them the same amount that I originally offered him, and I said, I'll take the F-100 and the T-33. I got both airplanes. So it worked out well for me. I'm glad I waited 5 or 6 years. Brought it back to Fort Wayne, flew it to Fort Wayne, and flew it a couple times, had some terrible problems with the airplane, put it to bed for about 1.5 years, and $600,000 later, and thanks to my crew chief, Paul Swick, and my engine man, Jim Presbendowski. We know him as Prez. This is what we have today, and it's absolutely beautiful. Prez put a new engine in it. We took the tail off. We took the engine out. We had the tail X-rayed. The slats, everything came off the airplane, and it was completely gone through. Fortunately, we live at a guard base that serviced the F-100s. And every night when I'd go out and take a look and see what was progressing, there the guard guys were. They loved the airplane, and they said, boy, this is great. We enjoy working on it. So that's how we came about the airplane. That's the reason it looks so pristine today. Thanks to my crew chiefs, Paul Swick and Prez, and Gordy's around here someplace too.
Dean, thank you very much, sir, and thanks for the airplane.
You're welcome.
You have a
Thank
good
you.
day.
Thank you.
Now, please welcome our guests, Dick Rutan and General Chuck Boyd. Gentlemen. General, start us off. You flew the F-100 before Dick did, back in the early 60s. What was your experience in the F-100? What was the airplane like, and when and where did you fly it?
Well, as I mentioned to Dick before, I think, first of all, it's the first fighter I ever flew. And I think most guys would tell you the same thing. The first one you fly, it's like your first woman. You may have better ones later, but that first one you're never going to forget. I got into the aviation cadet program as a youngster. I was a boy fighter pilot. Didn't have a college degree, but they had this wonderful program where if you could pass the quiz, you could get into flying training and officer training simultaneously. Shortly after I went through, they canceled that and they've never started it again. So timing is everything in life. The only thing I wanted to do was to fly airplanes. From the time I was 7 years old and got my first ride in a Piper Cub, and when I was a teenager I read Jim Salter's book, The Hunters, and then I knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And so besides my parents, I guess they were the two most influential people in my life. The F-100, I did well in pilot training, got an F-100, went there. I knew about the F-100 from the time that it had first test flight, I think, in 53, and it was the first airplane to go supersonic level flight, and so on and so forth. So when I got a chance to go to Luke, to fighter gunnery school in that airplane, I was on the top of the world. I wouldn't have traded jobs for anybody in the world or any amount of money. And the airplane was everything I thought it'd be. It was. You had to take 6 rides in a two-seater here before you could get in the C model. And the very first thing I did when I got in that C model is turn the mirrors in so I could see myself in the mirror and make sure that I wasn't having a dream. I took it up to Wickenburg. There's a little area up there that was supersonic. I rolled that rascal on its back and pointed it down and broke the Mach for the first time in my life. And I figured I had won the lottery of life.
So what about active duty, flying the airplane? What kind of missions? Where were you? Squadrons, assignments?
Well, maybe it's worth a minute to put this in some kind of context, and Dick will, I think, remember this, I guess, exactly the same. The period in the 50s was one of a drought for the tactical aviation community. The big choice in the early 51 between tactical and strategic air, strategic won for a couple of reasons. Kurt LeMay was a force of nature, and Pete Quesada, who was the tactical guy, well, he lost the toss, and they had one more 4-star billet, and Kurt got it. And he was a bomber guy, and he had a president starting in 52 or 53 who maybe the last one that was really fiscally responsible, and one of the ways he got that way was by limiting expenditures. And he knew he could have nuclear forces and with a deterrent effect that were cheaper than conventional forces. So the money went to SAC. The tactical outfit was hard up. And so a lot of us going through pilot training and what was happening to kids. Very often they go through gunnery school, but they didn't have an assignment, and they go to a GCI site, ground control intercept site, and which for a guy like that's fate worse than death. And that's what we all worried about. So, but when we finished, the times were changing a little bit. Some money was going into tactical forces, and I got an assignment to go to the Philippines. And we had paid homage to the nuclear missions by making these tactical airplanes mission nuclear capable, but so we had to do over-the-shoulder stuff and what have you. But we lived for flying air-to-air and air-to-mud. And this was a sweet airplane. It's the only one I knew, but as far as I was concerned, it was the best airplane in the world. A lot of people were thinking it was a dangerous airplane, and they built 2,294 of them, and 889 of them crashed, and a bunch of kids got killed in them. But for me, the airplane never did a bad thing to me. I never had anything ever happen to it, and I never even had a drag chute failure. It was a perfect airplane for me, and I'll love it till I die.
So you were in the Philippines, but also went to Europe also?
Well, not until I got into the 105.
Okay. But that was the extent of the F-100 experience.
That was the experience. When I left that operational tour in the 100, I said goodbye to that airplane, never flew it again. Went to the 105 and.
So, Dick, best airplane you ever flew, or not? Do you agree?
It's the best airplane I ever flew, and for the same reason. Now, it had some quirky characteristics, but if you're a young fighter pilot, you take that on as a challenge. You didn't want to fly a mundane airplane. You wanted to fly this Hummer. But anyway, I got the same start that you did, and when I was a little kid and finally just grew up enough to look around, it was we were basking in the glory of the victory of World War II. And I look around and I just was fascinated about those guys that fought over Nazi Germany and the bombers and the P-51s, and I thought, I wonder if I could do that. Look at the courage. You're the only guy that comes back and a whole squadron is shot down. How in the world do you get in another airplane the next day and do it again? I couldn't imagine that people could actually do that. And it was a haunting thing all my life to find out whether in combat the little Dickie Rutan could do the same thing. Just wonder if it was up to it. And the very first time that this airplane was on public display was at Fresno Air Terminal, and he flew it up from LAX to the factory. And I stood underneath that beautiful snout right there as a little kid, and I looked up at that thing and I thought, wow, it isn't going to get any better than this. And I vowed to myself that someday I was going to fly that airplane and fly it in combat. And then there was one day, the day I'll never forget, just like you. I was standing in the Luke Officers Club, just having completed gunnery school in Luke. Now, if you want to be a real fighter pilot, the only way to get into that is fly F-100s at Luke, right, that gun school. And I was standing in the back of the corner. I just graduated from the gunnery school, and the debauchery that was going on in the club that night. There was guys coming back from Vietnam, and we were all eager, listening to the stories, and we were ready to go. And there was it was a little bit of drinking of alcoholic beverages, if I recall, and other activities. And pretty soon I found myself standing in the back of the room and overlooking this scene. And I thought to myself, I got orders to combat right in my pocket. And there was no place on planet Earth that I wanted to be and going to be. It was right there at that time. And I was going to find out whether Dickie Rutan could do that or not.
What year was that, Dick?
That was my Vietnam tour was in 1967 and 1968 during the Tet Offensive.
Right. By the way, how many veterans are here? Raise your hands, please. How many vets? Yeah, great. So, Dick, you get Vietnam squadron, and you begin Misties. Is that when that started?
Well, that started, but a couple of things about this airplane that is kind of unique in itself. There was some really strange decisions made when this airplane first came into the inventory. Now, I can imagine that the Air Force was just thrilled to death. They were going to have a supersonic airplane at level flight. Wow. Now, in those days, we didn't have central air data computers and stuff. And North American told the Air Force, he says, hey, look, it's the pedostatic system. You know, they do not have a lot of experience in making a pedostatic system that would work. The big boom was going to help, but they said to the Air Force, now you can either have a pedostatic system that's accurate at slow speed, or you can have it accurate at supersonic speed. And so for some reason, somebody decided, wow, supersonic, that's really fast. The pilots need to know exactly what their altitude and airspeed is supersonic. Not even thinking that 1/10,000th of the flying time of all the F-100s would ever be supersonic. And so we found ourselves on GCA final approach, breaking out at minimums, 200 feet, and I'll never forget that the altimeter would unwind to 50 foot below the altitude. And we're doing at 500 knot laydowns, and the altimeter would be almost 2,000 feet in air. And if you would change back and forth a little bit, the altimeters would go all over the place. But boy, as soon as you went out of the Mach, they would swing around, whoop, and now we're accurate. Wow, we have accurate supersonic. Another thing, too, is that this is an airplane that actually has to be flown by the pilot. Wherever you move the controls, that's what the flight services do. Now, that's kind of strange, you F-16 guys, but the pilot actually had to move the controls and to move the control surface. Now, one thing about the F-100, it had a little directional problem, especially the early ones, right, the A models. And some guy was landed at Edwards Air Force Base, and he got it the nose high a little bit, and the burner at those days, they didn't light very reliably at high angles of attack, and he got in the classic saber dance, and I think every one of you has seen that. And I know when I went into gunnery school, they sat down and says, welcome to F-100 training. We got a little film we want to show you guys. And so we all got to sit there and watch the saber dance. But that was they tried to fix the tail and make it a little bigger and a little bit more rudder and try to refine that. But all in all, when you're in air-to-air combat, ACM and training, that the real good guys, they could pull the nose around and they can get it right on the very edge of a burble. And if you wanted to reverse course, you didn't do it with rudder, you just did it with, if you got to be careful, just a little opposite aileron and whap, you'd be around to the right side. And the adversary, he couldn't do that, unless he was doing it just right. But what a fantastic airplane. Another thing is it had a hard light, the afterburner. And it had this squirrel cage. And this is an afterburner that was stolen from an F-102, and they were very reliable. But the old squirrel cages, when that thing would light, if you had a lot of, kind of slow, a lot of angle of attack on the airplane, and you push it up to mill and put it out to burner, you'd always kind of hunker down like that. Because you could feel the engine, it would go, ew, bam! And fire would shoot out the front, and dirt would fly up in your face, and you say, ooh, wow, that was really cool. So after a while, you got the thing that you could unload it to a lower angle of attack, and you put it out burn, but you put it all the way in min burner. And then you could feel the eyelids finally come open. Now they're open. Now you can gun it, and now you're in full afterburner. So it was really a strange, neat airplane.
So, get back to mission. Yes. John,
let me add just one little thing to reinforce what
General.
Dick said. And that compressor stall required an underwear change. But in the quirkiness that he mentioned in you had to fly this airplane, I'm going to tell you a secondhand story, but it's one that really, I think, gets to the heart of it. Chuck Yeager was a squadron commander of the 1st Fighter Day Squadron at George, and he always flew the F model. I wasn't around, but some of my buddies were there. He always flew the F model, and everyone wanted to fly in the back seat with Yeager, because Yeager was, this giant of a fighter pilot and so forth. So my friend Buzz Byrne was in the back seat with him one day, and they go out and they shoot on the rag, and he shoots, he shoots better on the rag than anybody in the squadron ever thought about shooting. And they come back in, and go into the traffic pattern. He brakes, and he said, the needle, the vertical speed needle, never moved a tiny bit. Down on downwind, bang, the gear down, turn base leg, perfect pattern, drops the needle to stay right there, comes around on final, most perfect traffic pattern you'd ever seen. And they get down and they get just about to touch down and they go boom, boom. So Jaeger pulls the chute and holds the nose off for a while and drops the nose, turns off, and he says, I've flown 112 different airplanes, and this is the only son of a bitch I could never land.
So, Dick, back to Vietnam. Your missions. What were you flying?
Well, I flew the F-100. I got an assignment to Phuket, which is about halfway up between the South Vietnamese area. Phuket, what a neat name. Of course, we had a special adaptation to that name. But anyway, that was home to me. And you may have heard of Bud Day. I'm sure you've heard of Bud Day. Anyway, as a major, he was given the task to see if we could survive as forward air controller over North Vietnam. And it was very intense anti-aircraft fire with MiGs and SAMs and everybody shooting at you from small arms to SAM missiles. But we had a problem about finding targets up there and hitting them accurately. So they decided we're going to run a forward air control mission to see if it would work. And Bud Day was given that task, and he rounded up a handful of volunteers. And up until then, I was a single-seat, single-engine fighter pilot. And nobody wanted to fly a two-place airplane. Holy bananas, why would they want to do that? Anyway, I flew in country, single seat a little bit, but I got really bored because I'm blue 14 on the edge of the formation. We come in at high altitude. There's a FAC down there. There's all kinds of exciting things going on down there. And he marks it. We roll in, drop our bombs, and leave. And I says, wow, there's some exciting stuff going on down there. I'd like to be part of it and know more about it. Anyway, Bud Day and I, we went through the gunnery school at the same time, and he lived right next door from us there at Luke. And him and Dory, they had a couple of kids, little kids, and they had, he left me with a whole bunch of these cars. I mean, broken down cars. I said, how could a guy go to war and leave his wife with these horrible automobiles? And so I spent a lot of my spare time fixing Bud Day's junk cars that he left there. And so then when I got assigned to Phuket, I read, hey, Bud Day is here. And so I went running up. When I first got there, I went running up to the little Misty outfit that was out in the little back corner in wing headquarters. And I come running in. I says, where the hell is Bud Day? I got a bone to pick with him. And very solemnly, they looked at me, and he says, Bud Day was just killed yesterday. And that was the acronym for being shot down. And I thought, my God, this is war. People really do get hurt.
Misty's, where'd that name come from? What's it mean?
Misty was the call sign, and it came from Bud Day, and I think he liked the song a lot. But then when I found out what they were doing up there, and our missions were about 6 hours long. We had our own dedicated tanker off the coast of North Vietnam, and we'd come up there, and we would penetrate North Vietnam at low altitude right at dawn. And about an hour
How low altitude?
3,000 or 4,000 feet, sometimes lower. And it was really funny. You get up and you have a 1 hour intelligence briefing for the front seater, back seater. Now, the thing about the Misty is we didn't have a pilot-co-pilot relationship. Every other mission we would swap front and back. The guy was in the back, he was the secretary, and he was really busy. He took all the film, he recorded all the sightings, all the visual reconnaissance things. He checked all the fighters in. He found out their ordnance. He briefed them on the target. And then the front seater actually marked the target and put them in, and then we give them their bomb damage assessment and sent them on their way. And a lot of times, the bomb damage assessment was none of your ordnance was within 10,000 meters of our target, no visible damage. Have a nice day.
How'd you mark the targets?
Well, the F-100 was set up. We had 7 Willie Pete rockets on each outboard pylon. And it was we could fire them singly, and there were white phosphorus. Call them Willie Pete's, and you'd fire this thing down, and it would glow with smoke for a while, and then you could mark them. But I wanted to go to Misty so bad. I didn't want to be in country anymore. He says, well, you're a new pilot, and you can only be flight leads can go there. I says, okay, what do I got to do to be a flight lead? He says, well, Rutan, you're a long ways from that status. It may take you 6 months to work to be a combat flight lead. But I kept bugging him and bugging him and bugging him. And finally the commander says, all right, God damn it, Rutan, we're going to give you a flight lead checkout. And so I went out, and I was no more qualified to be a flight lead, but I got the flight of 4 out, and we actually hit a target, and we came back, and he said, now get the hell out of here. I'm tired of you bitching about it. And I stayed in Misty the whole time. Misty had a very high loss rate. They only wanted people to stay there for 120 days. It was 3 months. And they figured that that loss rate was going to be reasonable, that nobody could, well, whatever, with a 28% loss rate, that's all they asked for. And it was supposed to be volunteers. I did my first 120 days, and I thought, wow, this is really exciting. And there was no fine way that I was going to go back busting trees and killing monkeys again. So I talked them into a second tour, and I got shot on my start of my third tour.
Describe that. What was the shoot down? How did it happen?
Well, I got in the way of a big anti-aircraft round one day. And it's ironic because then I bugged the 105 guys, and I stole their patch. They got a really neat patch that says North Vietnam, 100 missions, and an F-105. Now, when I got shot down, I realized, wait a minute, I have 105 missions in an F-100. And so I took their patch and swapped the 0 and the 5 over, and I wear it. Now, all the 105 guys, they look at it, and it takes a long time for them to realize that it's 105 missions in an F-100, not the other way around. So we had a lot of fun with that.
You bailed out?
Yeah, well, you ejected.
Ejected.
During the 105 missions as a Misty, we would fly, our missions would be 4 and 5 hours at a time. We'd get up really early in the morning, about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, go through a 2-hour intelligence briefing about what happened there before, some of the targets that were struck at night, and so forth and so on. We'd record all that data. We'd go out and pre-flight our lone F-100 at Phuket in the early morning mist, and it was very quiet, just about an hour and a half before dawn, and every day at Phuket, a lone F-100F with a Misty call sign would roll down the runway and climb into the mist of South Vietnam. And we'd fly up north, we'd rendezvous with our tanker off the coast, and then you want to do a random penetration every day. But after a while, they got to know who we were, and they didn't mess with us a whole lot. Because my personal philosophy is, if you're a good gunner and you shoot at me, I'm going to come back and frickin' kill you. Now, when that happened, now there was a lot of gunners up there, and since you're up there half a day every time in your area, you know where all the gun crews were, and we'd all give them grades about how good they were. And in the really bad gun crews, we'd fly over and drop them candy and deliver their mail and stuff. But every once in a while, there'd be a good one, and they would lead you just right, and the tracers or the 37 millimeter would come by the cockpit so close that you could feel the shock waves coming off. And then you'd roll back, and there he was, and it's a classic ring floating off this gun sight. And I thought, well, you son of a gun, or words to that effect, and I'd orbit up over him, and I'd try to get some F-105s from the Alpha Strike Force that were going into Hanoi, or scramble the gunfighters out of Da Nang. And I thought, that guy is good. And I always wondered what it would feel like orbiting just out of range over him. And they knew what the drill was. And pretty soon there'd be 4 other fighters join me in the orbit. And they knew that if the Misty marked them, they were probably in for a lot of hurt. Now, the excitement to do that, and you think, okay, you're going to roll in, and the Misty rolls his wings over, and he pulls his nose down. And at that time, you're pointed right at the gun sight for just a handful of seconds. And they don't have any lead trajectory. They don't have to do anything but shoot right back directly at you. Before, we were jinking all the time, and they have to lead you. And that was a challenge. But for this handful of seconds, they knew that if that guy marked them, they were gone. And as soon as you roll the wings over and start the nose down, the whole place erupted with all kinds of tracers coming by. And I was thinking about when I was a little kid, I had the courage to get up on the high dive board and walk out in the end and look down. You know the feeling that you had the first time? Well, I had that feeling every time I rolled in. And boy, was this exciting. And you hold it up, you try to mark them so the smoke would billow and billow over the gun sight. So when Lead rolled in with his bombs, they had some obscurate. And then Lead would come down, drop his bombs. We'd come back and do an opposite direction and try to draw some fire with number 2 down the chute. And so for a handful of minutes, it was really exciting doing gun kills. And I loved it. And you could see a big stick of daisy cutters come off an F-105 one day, and you see them come off, and you see the gun sight just firing like mad, and they come down, and they come down, and they come down, and then all of a sudden, it just blow the crap out of them. And I'd come by in a low pass, and you could see guns laying on their side and stuff, and I'd pull off and do a roll, and it says, well, fool around with a misty, you. And I said, and anyway, the word got around quite a bit, and we had a relationship with them, and they really didn't mess with us a whole lot, sometimes. But every once in a while, they were trying to protect something, and you come over the horizon, and the whole place would light up, and they would just draw you to a target. What are these guys protecting this morning? And so we'd sniff around and find it. Aha! Call the gunfighters. Call the thuds out of Thailand. We got us a good target. But, man, it was exciting.
How were you rescued? How were you evacuated after you ejected? And were you over the north or the south?
Oh, no, I was over the north. I flew a few missions in the south. That's not where the action was. But the majority of it was, I was the second guy to fly 100 Misty missions. Nobody had ever done that before. Eben Jones was the first guy to do that. And I flew 105. That was 105 that day. And we went up and checked out the F-4 Phantoms. Ever heard of an F-4 Phantom? Double ugly? God. Anyway, I was going to go up and check them out in Da Nang, and so I went up there one day, and they were flying the same Misty profile. Went up, refueled, and now that ugly smoking F-104 or F-4 came down the same place that we did every morning, or randomly, and then they didn't know. They say, hey, that's not a Misty. We got to shoot him. And the whole mission, they shot the crap out of us, and I kept screaming, it's a Misty, you guys. It's a Misty. Quit shooting at me. Anyway, that wasn't a whole lot of fun. But that one day in late September of 1986, we were in on a truck.
66?
What'd I say?
86, but yeah, go ahead.
19, I got Voyager mixed up. 1968.
Okay.
Up the Quang Key River Valley, about 30, 40 miles. We put a flight of fighters in on this truck that we needed to kill, and they all missed. And every once in a while, the Misty would just say, the guys went up there 2 or 3 flights, miss everything. And we weren't supposed to do that. And so we'd come back around, and I'd strafe with our cannon here. I'd strafe 3 or 4 trucks and pull off. But then I couldn't take credit for it. I'd happen to give it to the guys that couldn't hit the ground barely. I says, oh, by the way, guys, I'm going to add 3 trucks to your kill so you can take that home. And their ordnance never came anywhere close. But and this day, those guys all missed. And for some reason, we kind of broke a rule, and the guy was with, his name is Chuck Shaheen, and he was finishing his first tour. And we were high school guys in the same area. And I says, hey, Chuck, this is your Champagne mission. Why don't I go with you? And I thought we were going to have a little thing in the Orange Cove Register that said, 2 local boys finished last mission. And so I went with Chuck on his last mission. And we went down, and we tried to do a angle strafe. And we looked around, and he thought, that damn truck. And so Chuck got right down in the weeds, which violated all the rules that we're supposed to, at about a 2-degree angle strafe pass. And I was looking around the corner, and Chuck opened fire and blew the hell out of the truck. And when he pulled off, bang, fire. Ripped a big hole in the belly right underneath my seat. We started dumping fuel out like mad, and it was torching, burning. Now, I always thought the F-100 could give me 20 seconds of flying. Every time I rolled in, it says, where's 20 seconds that I can go to bail out and hopefully get rescued in some way, either the jungle or maybe get feet wet. And I pulled up on fire, burning like mad, and I looked around, and it was just a coastal plain, and there was no way that you were going to land in that area and not get captured. And then we started turning towards the coast, and I could see the coast way over there. And I looked at the total fuel gauge, and the total fuel gauge was unwinding because we're just dumping fuel like mad. And you look at the coast, and you look at the total fuel gauge, and you say, there's no fine way we're going to make it. And then Chuck says, well, why don't we light the afterburner? And we talked about that with the guys around us, and they says, well, it may blow up. See, it's got fuel all inside. But then I thought about prisoner of war and all those bad people down there that were really mad at us, and I thought, Chuck, why don't we give it a shot? And so the guys that were on our wing, we talked about that, and the next thing I know, they were up in front of us looking back at us. And so we gritted our teeth and closed our eyes, pushed it up, and lit the burner, and it didn't blow up. So we used the fuel instead of torching to use it for acceleration. And at 1.3 Mach at about 15,000 feet, 15 miles from the coast, the old F-100 flamed out. And she did a nice parabolic arc over the coast and a perfect controlled ejection. And ejected, got in the raft, got picked up by the Jollies, wrapped up, because I knew when we're on fire, and I made a thing to myself, nobody had flown more missions. Nobody had more time over North Vietnam than I did. And when we pulled off, and I says, if I can just get out and I can get rescued, I am not coming up here again. I can get to see my kids, and I didn't really think I'd ever get to do that. Anyway, sure enough, ejected, went down on the raft. A couple, 3 hours later, the Jollies come picked us up. And I was so relieved after that. I wrapped up in a blanket in the back of the Jolly Green, and an hour-and-a-half flight back to Da Nang, I went to sleep.
Wow.
I was going home.
General, F-105, Thuds. Where did it get that name, Thud?
Well, they were crashing quite a few of them, and they go thud when they hit the ground.
I didn't think you'd ever admit that. That's what the F-100 guy said.
So what were your missions? You were flying out of where, Thailand?
Yes, I was flying out of Karat on the. Well, I've been in and out of Thailand, starting actually in the 100 days, well before the war. But by the time I went back there, PCS, I was flying out of Karat, and we were doing bombing missions mostly on assigned targets in various places in North Vietnam.
Hey,
Some
General.
road reconnaissance.
Right up in.
All right.
There you go.
Some road reconnaissance missions, but mostly fixed target missions.
Right. We've heard that the Vietnamese seemed to know where you were coming and when you were coming. How accurate is that?
Well, there are a lot of theories on that they had help from our own government. I've never bought that theory, but that's a widely held view. There are rumors that the 7th Air Force was infiltrated and they were getting the frags information. I don't know that that's true, but what I do know is that if they were important targets, it seemed like they really had a lot of capability there to be shooting at us. And I do know that we on some important things that needed to be done that any competent commander would insist upon doing, we were forbidden from doing. For example, we sat and watched the SAM sites being built. I say watched by reconnaissance photography. And we were forbidden to go in and strike those targets that were under construction until they were fully operational, and then we were allowed to go at a point where it was a dicey business to be doing.
Have you any idea what the reasoning was behind keeping you from blowing them up while they were being built?
It seemed to be that we only wanted to aggravate them up to a certain level. Or other theories were there are a lot of Soviet guys that are on those sites doing the construction, and we didn't want to kill any of them. But I really don't know. I think we had a massively incompetent White House at the time who really didn't know how to conduct a war, and a lot of kids didn't come home as a result.
Yeah, a lot of the guys, we'd fly up there and they'd have bombing halts. And I spend a lot of time trying to find the hidden trucks and all the truck parks during the day. And then that individual in the White House to say, well, we're going to have a bombing halt. And they'd all come out and they'd line up. There'd be hundreds of trucks lined up. And we'd circle over there and couldn't even touch them. Over Haiphong Harbor, the shipping in Haiphong Harbor, the majority of them were British registered ships in Haiphong Harbor. They were unloading SAM sites. And you're exactly right. They weren't allowed to hit them because there's a Russian down there And then when the Russians left, then they could shoot, and then we can bomb them afterwards. I had an F, one of your colleagues down. His name was Scotch 03. Shot down in the jungle, and we were talking to him, and we are trying to do the rescue forces, and the Jolly Greens would come up, and they couldn't cross the border. And I was really, really upset about that. And I said something kind of bad about them, not knowing the fact that they couldn't cross the border because there was some snot-nosed kid in the basement of LBJ's White House who was asleep, and nobody wanted to wake this son of a gun up to get permission for the Jollies to come in and pick up one of my fellow warriors.
General, you were shot down and captured. How did that go?
Well, not real well. I was on a SAM suppression mission that day, and we had F-100 F model wild weasels. Later on, there were Thud weasels, but at that time they were 100. So to be one F-100 weasel with the most sophisticated gear we had at the time, anyway, the sensor equipment, and 3 strike aircraft. And we'd go up there and troll for these guys and see if we get them to shoot missiles and figure out where the sites were. And that's what we were doing that day. And then one of them stuck a couple of them up my direction, and so I saw them come off the ground, and it's a pretty easy thing to just duck them, just dive into and just turn into them, and the closure rate was such that they weren't going to go off until you were past. So I did that, and I went down and came back up to roll in. I had rocket pods on, and got hit with flak on the top of the pop. It might be interesting for you to know that we were developing tactics in those days. This was early on, and we hadn't practiced a lot of this sort of thing before the war. And we developed a technique which also became, in a certain way, which I'll try to explain, the creed, I think, of the fighter pilot of the day. We'd go in, running in low and fast, very fast. That airplane was really fast. And the leader's job was to find the target, and the wingmen were to protect these flanks. And when the leader found the target, he'd call it, and then he would turn left or right 30 degrees or so, and we'd fall in behind in extended trail, and then he'd pop. He'd pop up to 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 feet and roll in, and we would come around, the wingmen would come around in sequence. Now, coming down the chute, there are 4 things, really, that had to happen in space and time with great precision. One was dive angle. And it could be anything. We used 45 for the most part, but as long as you knew what you were going to use and set your bomb site accordingly. And then airspeed to arrive at a predetermined altitude, at a precise airspeed, at a precise dive angle, and with an offset aim point that we determine on the basis of winds. Now, those are the things you had to do. The thing that you couldn't do if you wanted to be successful, and this, if you want to know the soul of the fighter pilot, I think it's defined right here. What you couldn't do coming down that chute was to jink, was to move around, and to make yourself more difficult to hit for those shooting at us. And there were a lot of people shooting at us. And so we said, and this is what we taught, and this is what we believed, from the top of the pop to bomb release, son, your ass belongs to Uncle Sam.
When you were picked up by the North Vietnamese, where did you go? Where did they take you?
Well, they took me to stripped me and down to my shorts and had me bound up pretty tight and took me off to a little hut someplace. I have no idea where I was. I know where I was when I was shot down, but they took me someplace and put me in a hut and kept me there until dark. And then got me out and put me in a truck and a blindfold on, and we bounced around for a while, and I ended up at a place that I didn't know then, of course, but later on knew to be the old French prison called Wallow, which we called over the years the Hanoi Hilton. And then there was a welcoming committee to make sure that we were comfortable over the next few days. And when they got through with that, then they put us in a little place called, that I learned was called the Heartbreak Hotel. 7 cells in a little cell block inside the Hanoi Hilton, and the first contact I had with another American was Robbie Reisner, who was in the cell across the way, and he had been there a while, so he knew what the schedule was for the guard change and so forth, and when he had a little period of time, he could get down and whisper under this old iron door, which he did, and made contact with me, and gave me my instructions, welcoming me in a better way than the Vietnamese had. But he was a commander, and I want you to understand this, he had command leadership oozing out of his pores, and the job that he did over the years was, I just don't know how anybody could have done it any better. He managed to, by the time he was shot down, he had a pretty ragtag bunch of guys there, had any kind of organ to be separated, of course, but they didn't have any real sense of organization or set of instructions on. I mean, everybody knew the code of conduct and everybody tried to adhere to the code of conduct, but there's a point at which you can't maintain that. And so he had a set of instructions. His influence spread by word of mouth and so forth, by using the tap code. And that's what he taught me that day. He says, you got to learn this. And he told me how it worked. He said, practice it in your head. Practice it. This is vital for survival. He said, eat whatever they give you. No matter how disgusting it is, it'll keep you alive, and on and on. And he really gave me the set of instructions that were the real guideline for behavior in prison.
Jim Stockdale, Admiral Stockdale, is quoted as saying that there was no way anybody could totally beat the ropes. How accurate was that for you?
It was certainly accurate for me, and it was accurate for everybody. The point is, and this is what's really important, I can break any man with a little time and not kill him. but willingness to take it again and again and again is the trick. What they want to do is they break you and make you a malleable unit then that will comply with what they want you to do. So to maintain your dignity, to maintain your self-worth, you have to be able to say, I'll do it again. You're never going to get me to that point. I'll do it again, and you'll break me, but you won't keep me broke.
How do you explain to yourself how you and all your compadres, the hundreds and hundreds of you, that you, or most of you, maintained yourselves, maintained what you just described, and were able to come out alive?
Well, this is a subject I don't spend much time talking about, but I'll tell you one thing, that I was at the Air Force Academy many years later and speaking with a bunch of cadets, and one of them asked me, how do you prepare for that kind of an experience? And I don't know why I said this exactly. I said it without thinking, but I said the best way is to have a good mother. I think I'm not sure everybody tell you that, but I think there's something about American character, and you get it at home. And the kind of guys that we were, that kind of slice of life in our country, were the kind of guys that had that kind of character. I think there's another aspect, and it was an even better part of it, and I think Dick would probably agree. There's something about the solo mentality of the fighter pilot that I do this all by myself. I don't do things by committee. And it's up to me. What happens in here is up to me. It matters to me. I matter to it. And that's, I think, helpful in getting through a difficult experience. Self-worth, self-responsibility. And that's a characteristic that you find, and I'm sure it's the same. I haven't flown with any of those kids today, but I'm sure it's the same today. Kids flying F-22s and what have you. It's a matter of character. Starts with your mother, and it ends up in the acculturation process of the fighter pilot.
Dick?
No, it's the character. And real quick little statement. It's a character of who we are. They say, well, he's a hero. Look how brave he is. And that's not the case at all. It's a normal, typical, freedom-loving person who rises to the occasion when they're faced with that. You think, well, I could never be a hero. And I say, BS, you could be a hero. If that situation came up, it would. And in fact, the time that America was attacked since Pearl Harbor, the worst attack on 9/11. Now we have multi-billion-dollar carrier groups and Air Force fighter wings with all kinds of technology, and Marines and Army divisions and stuff, all that to protect us on that day. And if you think about this hero thing, he said that 25% of that attacking force on that day was not taken out by any of these multi-billion-dollar military things. They were taken out by a handful of people on their way to vacation in California. And that epitomizes the whole thing about the character of who we are and the fact that we revere that flag. And on the Vietnam thing, there was something happen. Of course, I was almost there many times, but I tell you what, there was nobody more interested to see these guys, these heroes of mine, get off the airplane there at Clark in 1973. Is that right? Okay. When they got off, and there was one particular individual that walked off the airplane, and the gentleman is not with us any longer, but his name is Jeremiah Denton. Maybe you heard it, and I think that that all of you may have heard that word. And he was on the C-141 at Freedom for the first time. And he stepped down those stairs, and all the people there that would to greet him. And what he said was so profound that I can't even say it without crying, because it epitomizes what these individuals did to return with honor. And to think about what they had gone through all those years. And Jeremiah Denton walked up to the microphone and he said, "I consider it an honor to have had the privilege of serving my country under difficult circumstances." And I just can't imagine how lucky we are to have people like that considers that a privilege to be able to go through something like that. God bless you and your colleagues.
Jerry's speech is the best speech I ever heard.
That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, General Chuck Boyd and Dick Rutan.